This Ukrainian soldier, right, he's got this javelin missile, and he's like, I'm gonna take out that Russian force over there. And he fires it at them, and boom! There's a big explosion, and the enemy's gone. Subsequent to effecting the requisite alterations, he squeezed the trigger. The missile flew towards the enemy Russian target without making a sound. It was a long way away, but it hit its target exactly where it was aimed. The javelin is a particularly effective weapon for the destruction of enemy Russian army armored vehicles. This American-made guided anti-tank missile is launched from the shoulder and locks onto its target using a heat-seeking guidance system. It usually pierces the armor from above, rendering the vehicles completely unusable. This attack severely hindered the enemy Russian armored vehicle's ability to move on the ground. Reconnaissance drones belonging to the Ukrainian army spotted a group of enemy Russian soldiers deploying in the Kherson region. The coordinates were quickly transmitted to the command center. Upon receiving the order, the Air Force sprang into action. MiG-29 fighter jets struck the Russian target with guided bombs. The bombs hit their target with precision, destroying the command center and completely neutralizing the enemy Russian forces. September 14, 2025. The Ukrainian Army's drone teams carry out intensive operations against the enemy every day. The units first carry out effective attacks on enemy positions. Coordinated work with reconnaissance units makes these operations even more powerful. The units attack Russian infantry using both FPV kamikaze drones and bomb-carrying drones. Drone operators strike enemy targets with high accuracy. FPV kamikaze drones dive at lightning speed into Russian shelters, which are then destroyed in a short time. Thanks to night vision and thermal cameras in the unit's new generation drone systems, they quickly detect the enemy's position. Kamikaze drones dive from the sky onto detected enemy targets, striking them with pinpoint accuracy. These violent explosions completely neutralize enemy infantry and vehicles. September 15, 2025. The FPV kamikaze drone operator's target is a Russian forces staging area. Shortly after the drone operator marked the enemy's staging areas, a violent explosion occurred. Subsequently, the staging areas that were attacked were engulfed in flames. Ukrainian forces took advantage of the enemy forces' use of wooden buildings in particular and destroyed them in a short time. The destruction of these buildings prevents the enemy from reusing the same locations in the future. The unit also effectively destroys underground shelters built by Russian forces in forested areas. Drone operators approach the shelters with precision, completely destroying the enemy's shelter. On this occasion, drone operators from the Flying Skull unit detected a howitzer system belonging to enemy Russian forces while it was being transported. The FPV kamikaze drone quickly moved into position, locked onto the target, and, after searching for its most vulnerable point, launched its attack. A small explosion happened after the first impact, but the situation changed completely when the ammunition carried by the howitzer also exploded. A colossal fireball ascended into the atmosphere, accompanied by a succession of secondary detonations. The violent explosion resulted in the complete destruction of the enemy Russian howitzer, rendering it unusable on the battlefield. The Russian army launched an attack with armored vehicles in the Zaporizhzhia region. However, Ukrainian reconnaissance units detected the enemy's offensive attempt early on. Therefore, preparations were made to attack the route of the Russian armored vehicles. The units used powerful tank mines and FPV kamikaze drones to destroy these vehicles, which were covered with additional armor. When the Russian armored vehicles entered range, they were met with a powerful attack by Ukrainian forces. Explosions were rising one after another in the enemy armored vehicles. Ukrainian troops caused great panic among the enemy crew with powerful tank mines and kamikaze drones. The crew made sudden maneuvers to escape the attack zone after a series of violent explosions. However, the Ukrainian Army's FPV drone operators carried out highly accurate attacks on the enemy army's armored convoy. As a result of the coordinated attacks by the units, the Russian army's armored vehicles were engulfed in black smoke and began to turn into piles of scrap metal. The Ukrainian army's determined defense quickly scattered and shattered the enemy. September 14, 2025. Russian soldiers had hidden in forested areas to gain a foothold on Ukrainian territory. The enemy soldiers were trying to establish deployment points on foot in the wooded areas, and were building shelters at these points. However, the reconnaissance units and intelligence units, which are the surveillance units of the Ukrainian army, were conducting intensive search and sweep operations. They were quickly detecting all movements of the enemy army with reconnaissance drones. Subsequently, the coordinates of the enemy's shelters and positions were marked. After the reconnaissance units identified the enemy soldiers' staging points, the FPV kamikaze drone operators were ready to attack. The operators headed towards the coordinates received from the reconnaissance units. They approached the designated enemy targets with precision and carried out effective attacks. The Ukrainian Army's kamikaze drones, particularly those belonging to a unit called Hellgopher, were giving the enemy a living hell. Shortly after the kamikaze drones marked the enemy target, attacks were carried out, followed by violent explosions. After the explosions, Russian soldiers panicked and abandoned their positions. However, reconnaissance drones had detected the enemy soldiers' new hiding places. An FPV kamikaze drone approaches this location with precision and strikes. Seconds later, a huge explosion neutralized both the Russian soldiers' shelter and the infantry. After the violent explosions, enemy soldiers are trying to use nearby ruined buildings as shelters. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian army's drone teams continue to work in a coordinated manner. Reconnaissance units are tracking enemy soldiers moment by moment. The buildings where they are hiding are reported to the kamikaze drone operators. The operators are successfully neutralizing enemy activities by carrying out successive attacks on the points where the enemy is hiding. The powerful ammunition in the FPV kamikaze drones quickly reduces the buildings where Russian soldiers are hiding to rubble. In these effective attacks, the high-precision strikes of the FPV drone operators quickly neutralize the enemy. In the Kursk region, one of the most strategic points of the war, the Ukrainian army targeted a modern military weapon of the enemy Russian army. The vehicle attacked by the Ukrainian army was a Malva, a modern military vehicle. The successful attack, carried out with the help of an FPV kamikaze drone, caused significant damage to the enemy vehicle. A Ukrainian FPV kamikaze drone was searching for its prey in a wooded area. It located its prey and made a quick dive. And boom! A violent explosion occurred on the target. After the explosion, smoke began to rise from the wooded area. The FPV kamikaze drone was once again searching for a target in open terrain. Enemy infantrymen were trying to hide in the shade of the trees. After a brief scan, the drone operator located the exact position of the enemy infantrymen. It dove between the branches of the trees at lightning speed. A spectacular explosion occurred. The last target was a Russian shelter. The FPV drone operator launched an effective attack on the enemy shelter. The attack caused collapses in the shelter. The Russian army had moved into the Donetsk region with armored vehicles to attack the Ukrainian front. The Ukrainian army's reconnaissance drones were at work. They immediately detected this attempted attack by enemy soldiers. The reconnaissance units transmitted all information about the enemy to the Central Command. Russian army tanks had already begun firing on Ukrainian positions. The Rubizh unit, attached to the Ukrainian army, had already moved to stop the enemy forces. The units launched an effective bombardment on the enemy convoy. This first explosion caused panic among the enemy soldiers. The Ukrainian army's artillery units also sprang into action immediately. They began firing effectively at the enemy's coordinates. These effective attacks carried out simultaneously by the units wreaked havoc on the enemy convoy. The enemy infantrymen were forced to get out of their armored vehicles. They tried to flee on foot. Reconnaissance drones immediately transmitted the coordinates of the route taken by the enemy infantrymen to the artillery units. Effective fire from the artillery units caused panic among the infantrymen on foot. The accurate fire destroyed some of them. The fire from Ukrainian artillery units using HIMARS systems completely stopped the movement of armored vehicles. Smoke was now rising from the enemy soldiers. The ammunition fired by the artillery units and drones exploded on the enemy vehicles. The explosion set some of the vehicles on fire. Shortly thereafter, the ammunition inside the armored vehicles caused a second explosion. An effective bomb launched from a Ukrainian drone, UAV, struck an enemy armored vehicle. A violent explosion occurred in the armored vehicle. It was caused by the explosion of the ammunition inside. Shortly thereafter, when the Ukrainian observation drone surveyed the enemy vehicles, only burning vehicles remained. The burning enemy vehicles would soon be reduced to a pile of scrap metal. Ukrainian military intelligence identified a building used by enemy Russian soldiers in the town of Toretsk in the Donetsk region. The Ukrainian Central Command developed a plan to neutralize Russian forces. For the operation, infantrymen were transported in armored vehicles to the point where the Russian soldiers were stationed. Covering fire from the armored vehicles allowed the infantrymen to surround the building. Thanks to the fire from the armored vehicles, the enemy soldiers were unable to launch any attacks. Ukrainian infantrymen immediately surrounded the building. Some soldiers surrounded the building while others entered it. Ukrainian units worked in a coordinated manner, giving the enemy forces no respite. Smoke rose from the building. The Russian soldiers had nowhere to flee. Finally, Ukrainian infantrymen placed high-powered mines inside the building. Shortly thereafter, a powerful explosion completely destroyed the central part of the building. Ukrainian soldiers then detonated 2 more mines in the building. The mines reduced the building to a pile of rubble. The enemy soldiers were destroyed in the rubble of the building. Thanks to the coordinated work of the Ukrainian army soldiers, the enemy Russian soldiers were neutralized in a short time, without being able to escape from the building where they were located. The Ukrainian army's kamikaze drone completely destroys the Russian forces' barracks with this attack. After the attack, enemy soldiers immediately try to enter the underground shelter. However, Ukrainian infantry catch the enemy soldiers as they enter the shelter. Russian infantrymen immediately tried to flee from Ukrainian soldiers. They did not surrender. Kamikaze drones belonging to Ukrainian forces carried out a swift attack from the sky on the fleeing enemy soldiers. Enemy soldiers hiding in the vegetation were neutralized by a violent explosion. An infantryman who tried to escape the first attack was completely neutralized by a second attack. A group of Russian soldiers are trying to use abandoned buildings as cover when suddenly a violent explosion occurs. This explosion destroys everything. Ukrainian forces continue their attacks without pause. They detect enemy infantry trying to advance through forested areas and carry out effective attacks. After the attacks, the enemy infantry is neutralized. The fleeing Russian soldiers hide in the nearest underground shelter. However, drone operators enter the enemy's shelter and blow it up. The Ukrainian team also quickly detected Russian soldiers trying to hide in the wooded areas with thermal camera drones. Enemy infantry caught on the heat radar are skillfully neutralized with attacks. Advanced systems stop enemy activity more quickly. September 14, 2025. A Russian Bukhanka vehicle is spotted by Ukrainian forces. The unit had determined that the enemy vehicle contained a large amount of ammunition. The Phoenix unit moved in on the moving enemy vehicle with FPV kamikaze drones. An FPV kamikaze drone carried out its first attack, causing a large explosion. The attack also triggered the ammunition in the vehicle, further increasing the scale of the explosion. Ukrainian forces immediately launched a second FPV kamikaze drone to completely destroy the enemy soldiers and their vehicle. The drone operator's second attack completely destroyed the Russian target.